Enterprise Management 360.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Tech Chat. Now, as you will notice, we're still not in the EM360 studio as per usual, and like everyone else, we're having to do things a little bit differently, but we thank you for joining us. And actually, this setting does lend itself quite perfectly to today's conversation, as I have Kurt Glazemakers, who is the SVP of Engineering at AppGate, joining me to discuss secure, flexible working. So, Kurt, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me.
Hey, hi, no problem.
Of course. So if we kind of start off then, obviously with what's going on at the moment, this is a very apt conversation that you and me are having, and companies had to adapt very quickly, didn't they, to their employees working from home, and some may not have had any kind of system in place to begin with. They were just kind of thrown in the deep end. So from your standpoint, what have you been noticing across the market in terms of how this is being handled and how it could be approved this is to continue as it looks like it will?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think today what we see, first of all, the time to prepare yourself for this was actually very, very short. So people had to be creative in all kind of ways. Typically, the biggest problem I see to begin with is that normal situation to work from home, like VPNs or other solutions, are typically a minority of the user population in an enterprise, right? So VPNs typically addresses 15-20% of the users, but if suddenly 100% of the users need to work from home, that gives a huge amount of challenges. I've seen several creative ways. People buying massive amount of cheap Chromebooks and ship them to to their employee at home to at least get started. Spinning up desktops everywhere, VPN type of measurements that are trying to cope up with the load. So a lot of action has been taken. And in the very first place, the very few days, it's all about making sure that people can work. I think right now it's more, can they work safe? Because with all of these very fast interventions, a lot of shortcuts have been taken. It was all about making sure people could work, but security lost completely ground on this. And there is a few items that are severely impacted by this fast movement. People get very creative, try to get their people work somehow, but it's definitely not the way it should be, and it's definitely, if this situation which it looked like, it's going to be much longer.
Yeah, definitely. Just because it's worked from day one doesn't mean you can't improve it. And I think a lot of companies, fair play to a lot of them, have really taken the bull by the horns and done a good setup, but it's improving as we go along. You've got to adapt as it goes. And you're right to bring up VPNs there, because a lot of organizations are relying on them to deal with remote working, which is, an important factor for a lot of people. But what can you tell me about the software-defined perimeters, or SDP, and how they relate to the attack surface, in the event of a cyber attack? You mentioned about the actors there.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of items in this approach that are quite important. Let's start in general where the problem is with VPN, and then I'll move a little bit further down the road where SDP actually has really some benefits. I think in general, what we see with VPN are a couple of issues. The first part of the issue is that they typically rely on type of appliances, and appliances are need to be bought for a certain load. So if you suddenly have 5 times a massive amount of load increase, you need to buy more appliances, or you need to scale them somehow, and that doesn't really work pretty well and not fast. So it's definitely a shortage of VPN appliances these days to make sure that everybody can work. The second part of that problem is that suddenly people that were never working from home start to work from home, and that gives a lot of problems with VPNs to make sure that those people get the right access profiles. VPN is more a very wide extension of your corporate network all the way to your home computer. But that gives a lot of challenges because, first of all, that home computer was never under control of IT, suddenly has access inside the entire network, and that gives a huge problem. So having said that, I'll give you a very simple example of what software-defined perimeter brings to us. And basically, it really is about a software-defined perimeter is all about authentication, the device, and the user, and only giving access to what you really need. And one of the greatest examples I can give here, with a few large enterprise customers, even some government customers, that need to move quickly. And they all had their physical desktops in the office. And one of the things that a software-defined perimeter can do very well is use that identity, use those parameters to create dynamic rule sets so what you can access inside the network. And with one rule, we could basically look up what the appropriate host names were for the desktops. So the desktops are part of the directory system in this case and are typically claimed for that user. And it's only one rule that retrieves those claims, finds those desktops, and really create a unique user to only access his own desktops in the network. And that gives a real benefit because they can work from home. They only are able to allow to connect to their own desktop at the office, and all the network controls and whatever that were in place for those desktops are still in place. So all the AI tools that work, baseline technology and stuff like that is really working as it should be. So that gives you a big difference between how you do it with VPNs and just give network access versus like a very dynamic rule and a single instance in this case.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that universal ruling should be applied across the board. Where you mentioned there, no trust is seeing such a rise in popularity. So yeah, I 100% agree. And it leads me kind of nicely onto my kind of one of my last questions here, talking about how, because let's be honest, this is going to change working life for the foreseeable future. You mentioned it with SDP is going to have such a major impact from that standpoint. So we're going to see a very different approach across the board in this post-COVID world. So what are your predictions then for how this is going to affect things such as, you know, security costs, home network setups, and just general employee engagement as well as important?
Yeah, there are a couple of things. I think the very first thing is that what you will see, which is also part of Zero Trust, is you always assume you have an unsafe network to start with, right? And that means that whether you're working from home or in the office, and typically the office would fall under like a guest network or whatever, is considered as an unsafe network, and that's a starting point. And I think that makes, or if you have that as a starting point, you can work from anywhere much more easier, right? That's actually one of the basic concepts. So that is the first place. A lot more software-driven things. I think that the time of having appliances somewhere and you have to go through a single hub to do all security posture check and then go out again, which if you're if you're working from home, you have to go to the office, and from the office to the cloud, and the traffic comes back to the office and goes back home. That doesn't really work pretty well. The software-defined perimeter, we are able to make direct connections and all of these things. Some of them even have a cloud-routed model where you go to cloud first and back. All of them have benefits and drawbacks, but I think it's really important that the gravity point of the network security will not be under a appliance stack that lives in corporate data center or whatever, but it's going to be more a spread out and more cloud, or at least a dispersed type of oriented solution. So you always use your closest entry point to do filtering, or you make a direct connection to your environment. And if you have that flexibility, and I think we have that kind of flexibility in our products that we're building, to make sure that with our product AppGate SVP, we're able to drive direct connections to both your on-prem network. And so if you're in the office, you have your direct link and it's the same speed that you have on the local LAN. But if you're working from home, you have the direct path to your cloud instance as well, and you don't have to go back to the enterprise.
Yeah, definitely. There's a benefit to come out of this for sure. And it's, you know, seeing that improvement and seeing that progression versus here's a presentation of what I think could work, and we'll look at it down the line. It's now acting quickly. So yeah, very, very exciting. And Kurt, thank you very much for taking the time to kind of walk us through and explain all of this. It's been great talking to you.
Cool, no problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you everyone who took the time to watch this episode. Make sure you do check out AppGate for more information on what we've spoken about today. You can also follow us on our social media channels, which is LinkedIn and Twitter. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. And of course, for more great content, make sure you head on over to em360tech.com.